So the Motherlode was announced for Season 2 of The War Within, and I did a video the other day talking about the dungeons in general, and I kind of stated that I thought Motherlode was a good choice to bring back, but I've seen forums online, I've seen comments, and I've definitely had some discussion with a lot of people, and a lot of people are not super excited for Motherlode, so I wanted to take a little trip down memory lane to try to remember and kind of paint a picture of what the dungeon was like, and maybe some things that Blizzard can improve. Again, everything's kind of subject to change. We've seen changes even with newer dungeons as recent as Shadowlands. Mist saw some pretty impactful changes, both for better and for worse. Necrotic Wake saw a lot of changes as well, mostly referring to like boss percentage as well as the weapons, like kind of those cantrip effects. But I want to kind of just take a little trip with you guys. So hopefully this video is coherent and makes sense. What I'm going to do is I'm going to walk through pretty much the entire dungeon, explain the mob mechanics. We'll look at like percentages from old routes, and talk about just like the general strategy. So anyways, when you enter the dungeon, you're going to start on the nice sandy platinum sands of wherever we are. And I don't actually know. Kazan? Are we actually on Kazan? That's crazy. But basically we're going to start off in the Crapopolis, which is very funny. So the gate starts right here. You're going to go in. There's what's cool about the start of this dungeon is you actually can like start ramping up stuff early on these like these mobs. I believe these crabs also gave percent. I'm going to verify that really quick. So I'm going to open. So here I have Keystone Guru, which actually has all of, you can go back and look. There's also a way to look at this through MDT through like, I think there's a legacy add-on, I believe, on CurseForge. There's also a Weakor that also pulls them up. But basically what I want to do is look at a route. But yeah, you can actually pull a lot of these like early crabs and get early percent. You can see 0.8%. This won't really matter too much because what people think is a dungeon where you have to pull a ton of percent. I think they're a little mistaken on how much percent you really need to pull in here, mostly because we used to have this thing called obelisks from the Awakened Affix, which allowed you to skip the majority of the back half of the dungeon. So you had to get most of your percent from the front half, mostly because the mobs were just easier to deal with, despite them having high lethality rates. But that's, I think, what a lot of people remember. You would take this obelisk, for example, Urgoth, the Breaker of Heroes. You would go into the N'Zoth realm. You would take this mini boss, you would drag him all the way to the first boss arena, do the first boss, get Lust on CD, and then you would back pull pretty much all of this percent because you needed it. Because the rest of the dungeon, you were using this obelisk to skip to second boss, you're using this obelisk to skip to third boss, and you're using this obelisk to skip to the last boss. And because of that, it felt like you had to pull so much percent at the start of the dungeon, which offset the rhythm where it felt like you were doing trash, boss, all your trash, and then going boss, boss, boss. And that's obviously not going to be the play anymore because we don't have obelisks. So let's take some time to walk through this dungeon. So starting off, we have a couple of laborers. These laborers are non-elite mobs, and they don't really do much outside of the fact that when you pull them, they do this throw wrench cast. This does insane damage, similar to the mobs in Siege of Borealis, like the gutters at the start of the dungeon. That very first initial hit will slap tanks. So when you pull these guys, use a DR. You can also use things like Ox Statue to soak it up, the damage. You can also use things like mind control. Dominate Mind. There we go. You can use things like Dominate Mind also to soak up a lot of the hits onto a mob. And as long as they don't kill the mob directly, you'll still get percent from the mob because you'll be able to drop that and then still hit them. So for example, there's a laborer here. I can drop an Ox Statue, which will eat this first wrench, which is pretty cool. You also have these vendors. These vendors do two casts. They do this Ice Spritz. This will channel on the targets. And if it successfully finishes this cast, it does a little bit of damage over time. It slows your movement. And then if it finishes, you're going to get stunned. You don't want that to happen. And then if a mob is unhealthy, they're going to try to cast... Ooh, I accidentally killed that one. They're going to try to cast a Cola. I don't think it'll do it anymore. Here, let me see if I can... Let's see if I can get him to cast Cola. This, the little Kaja Cola refresher will allow this mob to restore 5% of its max health every 2 seconds. So you don't want that to go off. So basically, the vendors kick their stuff. I'll get to some of these mobs later. But then next we have these assassins. These assassins were kind of scary because they did this thing called Toxic Blades or something along those lines. Toxic Blades. This would allow their melee attacks as well as their next AoE Hail of Flechettes to apply a really nasty poison to your entire group every tick. So you definitely didn't want to let that go off. You always wanted to kick Toxic Blades, and then on the Flechette cast, you would want to make sure you're just stunning it, knocking it, displacing it, etc. So what you would do is this cast is about to come out again. Oh, nope, hail. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna just, oh, he's still gonna do it. What you do is just paralysis, and then it's gonna kill him because my auto attacks are gonna kill everything in here. These thugs do inhale vapors, which applies makes them do more physical damage. And what they used to do is they used to charge your allies. I believe I'm the only one in here, so that's why he's not charging. But basically, these guys are fairly lethal. If you pull a lot of them, you definitely want to be careful. And so the rest of the dungeon, you're going to see a combination of all of these guys. You're going to see vendor thug, vendor assassin. How you would pull this area is kind of up to you. Thugs were typically a little bit easier to deal with when you had things like rogues, druids, now monks in your group, which can soothe. Evokers can now soothe. We used to also not have things like evokers in our group to be able to knock things up consistently. Thunderstorm used to be an insanely annoying knockback. Also, shamans used to be really shit at Mythic Plus. You have access to those now. So this dungeon might be a lot easier because of the access of CC that a lot of groups and classes have now. Next, we have jockeys. Now, the jockeys were kind of the problematic mob with this dungeon for a lot of reasons. They had a lethal cast that was invisible called Grease Gun. You also, what would happen is they would jump into these mechs, and if they jump into these mechs, they would give you double count. It would double dip. You would get the count for killing the jockey, and you would get the count for killing the mechanized peacekeeper. So the strategy used to be tag the jockey, let them jump into a mech, and then you would double dip on the percent. The mech is worth like 3.5%. The jockey's worth like 0.8 or whatever. So you're getting like 5% per. So you would let them jump into all of these different mechanized peacekeepers, and the peacekeepers are pretty easy to deal with. I'll go over those in a second. The jockey, upon pulling it, normally what would happen is it would try to get into these mechs unless you interrupted it or stunned it or etc. Like you'd have to disrupt it from getting into the mech, or your group could opt into being like, hey, get in that mech. We'll take the percent. It's easier to deal with. Anyways, the jockeys also cast this concussion grenade. Just dodge it or kick it. Honestly, there's better kicks. When there's a cast that causes an avoidable mechanic to happen, you generally don't care to kick it because, again, it's avoidable. All you have to do, the way you avoid it is by sidestepping. So if you pull a jockey with like a vendor, for example, save your kicks for the vendor. Anyways, you'll also see that they kind of sometimes will randomly whip out their gun and shoot me. And that is the grease gun mechanic. I'm going to wait for it to happen. Let's see. Is it going to happen? Please happen. There it is. So he's going to randomly do like a pistol shot. In the highest level of keys, that was pretty much lethal. I always thought it went on the closest target to the mob, but that might not be true. Definitely correct me if I'm wrong on that. But basically when you ran full melee groups, like jockeys were really deadly. So generally, that's why you wanted jockeys to get into the mechs. You would tag them. It would give you the percent when they eventually die, but they would get into the mech, and then the mech does damage that isn't lethal to your group. Anyways, let's move on. So we've pretty much gone over every single mob in this area except the Peacekeepers. So let's talk about this guy really quick. I'll pull him over here. So the Peacekeeper, he does a couple of casts. First, he does Charge Claw. This will cause a chain lightning effect whenever he successfully melees the tank. This can be just kited. He also does this random thing on the, I don't remember what this mechanic is called, but basically this pool on the ground will disorient anyone caught in it. So definitely don't stand in it, especially if you're a tank, because if you get disoriented as a tank, the mobs don't care. They will start hitting all of your allies. The way you counter this Charge Claw mechanic, though, is if you're not kiting, your group stands behind the target, so it doesn't leap to them. But as you can see, if I stand in this here, I'm going to get disoriented. Just like that. The jockey is now going to fly out, and then normally what he would do is he would try to run to another mech, or you just end up killing him. And the Peacekeepers have one other mechanic, which I don't know if it's been removed, because I've been in here a few times since they've announced it, and what they used to do is they used to do a shield that would force your group to move behind the targets, or behind the target. Let's see if he'll do it here. Just get a little bit of damage on him. Maybe, okay, so this energy shield. I can't hit him from the front. See, I'm going to throw a keg smash. Everything's going to, it's going to be nullified. You have to move behind the target to do damage to it then. Another reason why your group should be standing behind the mob. Charge Claw, you're going to kite out because you just want to. Jockey's going to fly out. You're going to stun him. You're going to just kill him. Easy peasy. So that's all the trash in this dungeon. So let's take a jump over to MDT. Now, in a normal, let's just say you're holding W through this dungeon and you're trying to minimize the trash, especially in this front area, you're going to try to probably skip around a lot of this stuff. And you're going to do a pull like this. So the first couple pulls of your dungeon is going to put you at 7.6%. And then normally what ends up happening is you kind of pull around the side, or you kind of beeline it for the boss, like right through the middle here, kind of to where I'm standing. But you're going to end up pulling this pack, for example, which has a Maki, a couple laborers. This pack has a jockey and a couple laborers in it, as well as a vendor. But generally speaking, you can kind of just like walk through this area, hug this, and then you can be at boss without pulling almost anything. Now, you do have to be careful. If the jockeys are supposed to interact normally, they will run to these mechs. And when they run to these mechs, they could cause issues with some of these nearby packs. But if we assume we're able to keep it clean, we ended up pulling this pack, this Peacekeeper, this pack, and this pack, and this pack. So now we're at 27%, which seems kind of low. But let me talk about, let me get through the dungeon, then we'll talk about where you can pick up more percent. So next we'll be on the Coin Operator Crowd Pummeler. This is such a cool fight. I'm very excited for this fight to be back because it has damage amplifiers, and damage amplifiers are very fun. There's a pretty hard enrage on this fight as well. So how it works is, you know what, let's just pull him. Now, it's weird. I think for some reason you can kick the static pulse now, which is not normally the case. So static pulse is the first thing that happens, and what this does is it does a ton of AoE damage, and it applies a nasty, I believe it applies a dot. Then he does this football bomb launcher, which causes these bombs to spawn, and then he does this shocking claw cast, which is a frontal, which can be avoided. Now these bombs you can kick into the boss, and it makes him take increased damage for 15 seconds, and what you want to do is you kind of want to stagger these in to extend the buff on him. And now he's taking 150% more damage, and then he does Coin Magnet. So over the course of the encounter, the guys on the side of the room, like these supporters and stuff, are gonna throw coins into the arena, and they don't do any damage to you. This is what they look like. They typically land around the boss, and whenever he does Coin Magnet, he sucks up the coins and he gets a permanent damage gain buff. And so your idea as a tank is to make this, you never want to see this stack, because the static pulse, especially in the highest end of content, will get to the range of like, you have to have a DR for every single one, and if you don't, it'll one-shot you even without a damage amplifier, unless Blizzard does a good job tuning it. So pretty much whenever these come out, you want to start moving the boss. So monks, for example, will have a really easy time with this with Provoke, but as you can see, he starts spell queuing when he starts spawning like the football bombs. So you kind of want to like start him in the middle, and then you want to pull him around the room as these coins spawn. And you want to try to keep the room nice and, well, you want to keep him away from it. It's kind of hard. They're not static. They don't spawn in a set position based on him. They spawn randomly around him. So you kind of want to like keep him up against the wall here to really maximize your space. So we'll pull him away again. As you can see, the coins are kind of here. Now the range on the Coin Magnet is pretty far. Like, you'd be surprised. I think like he'll suck this one up if it goes off. Let's see. Yeah, so he's sucking it up. So you definitely need to move him away. And definitely your DPS will want to kick these bombs. And yes, it's a DPS loss because you have to run out. But you run out, kick the bomb at him, and then he gains a big old buff. Now, if you miss, you can miss the soccer ball, by the way. You can kick it in the wrong direction. You definitely want to avoid doing that. He might cap at 4. He's sucked up more than 4, and he's like capped here, which is interesting. Maybe something to know. Maybe it's because I'm on a lower difficulty, but 40% damage gain is like really scary. But yeah, if you see these bombs, I can kick them the wrong direction on accident. So you definitely want to be careful. So what that does mean, though, is that if there is one that's really far, your healer can run out, kick it towards the group, and then your melee can then kick it in. So you can actually play soccer on this fight, which is kind of fun. But anyways, that's the whole fight. The only thing that I didn't really mention is that the shocking claw. It always targets the tank, and generally what you want to do is you want to face it towards the wall like this, and then when you face it towards the wall, your DPS will never get hit by it. I don't even see it popping up in his log anymore, which is kind of funny. Anyways, aim frontal at the wall. Oh, there it is. Boom, shocking claw. Aiming at the wall. Again, it is avoidable, and then do big damn, kill him. So that's the first boss. So at this point, we're at 27% count. We've killed the first boss. We kind of covered all the starting trash. Let's move on to the second area. This area used to be really fun. So how it used to work is you used to skip to first boss, Lust, back pull a bunch of trash, wait for Lust to come off a cooldown, and then you would do a massive pull in this area, because a lot of these mobs are very easy to deal with. And it's also like, it's not as lethal for your group. There's a couple of the guys here. There's these rats. All they do is they throw rocks at you. You'll see here, they'll do throw rock. This just does a little bit of physical damage to the tank. The Earth Shapers do this rock lance cast. It's pretty lethal if a lot of them overlap, if you're pulling multiple Earth Shapers. And then they also cast a thing called Earth Shield, which I don't remember if this doesn't heal them, but I think it makes them heal. Attacks against them makes them heal for 1% of their max health, and they also take 10% reduced damage. So it looks like it can be purged. So if you can purge it, great. If not, just kick it, interrupt it, whatever. And then you also have these sappers in this first area, which they basically just drop bombs. They'll throw bombs at your feet, which you just have to avoid. And then when they die, they drop a lot of bombs. So here we go. We just move. They blow up. And then when you kill the sapper, they drop like a bunch of bombs. So then you have to move really quick. So normally what you would do is you would come into this area and you would just like, you would pull like a lot of this trash together. It's a bunch of sappers and Earth Shapers. And then you just have to like, you would make like little circles. You would all stack as a group. You can just like do little circles around the room. You can make sure you're getting kicks. And then as soon as you kill them all, you just run away. And that's it. But you're probably not going to be pulling these groups anymore, because again, we used to be able to skip a bunch of shit. Let's talk about percent. Actually, let's get to the next boss and I'll talk about percent. So normally to get around this pack, you can either Mind Soothe because they're all humanoids. But generally you would just like do this pack as well. And then you had this hill pull. This hill pull was really obnoxious. Not that these Stone Furies do anything or these Shale Biters. But you definitely didn't want to mess with the mini boss at the top of the hill. I hope they change them a little bit. But anyways, I forget what these guys even do. I know they do a giant AoE that you need to run away from, which is kind of obnoxious. This Furious Quake, it can be kicked. They can be stunned as well. But normally what you would do is you would pull them all together, and then all you would do is like you would either have range or you would just like roll out or run away whenever it comes out. But it's a pulsating thing. So once you run away, you have to stay away. You can interrupt it with like paralysis, for example. Ring of Peace also works. You can also touch of death. So now we have two sappers, 2 Earth Shapers here, and this guy Ascari, Taskmaster Ascari. I remember this guy being super brutal. He has his broad slash. You obviously don't want to have your group stacked for that. You have rock lances going on. His cover, intercepting 50% of all damage taken to nearby allies. Damage reduced by 75%. That's a lot. You definitely don't want to mess with this guy. If you can skip him, great. I can't remember if he has True Sight or not. We're just going to assume that he does. So you're going to have to figure out a way to pull him. Second boss. Let's talk about percent really quick. So at this point, we're going to we'll throw this in because I did pull it. We pulled all of this, which is a lot. This is a lot of percent. You generally wouldn't do this. And then we did the hill pull, which we could just do in one pull as well. And then we did the top pack. So now we're at 55%, and we're at the second boss, which is a good point to be. So we're going to do this next boss. Okay, so how it works is you have 2 totems here. You don't have to use these totems if you don't want to, especially if you have like a DK in your group and stuff. You can pick up one of these fracking totems, and then what you can do is you can remove one of these guys from the fight. So you can just put this down. He's in-capped for a minute. You can do the same thing here. And what happens is this boss, what he does is he summons adds throughout the fight. He empowers them. He does a frontal. It's pretty chill. So I'm going to just pull him. And what normally you would do is you would pull him off to the side. So what these adds do is they don't really fixate on anyone. Like they don't fixate on the tank. They fixate on whoever they're fixating. And so that person has to like kite them. These guys can be CC'd until he empowers them. Once he empowers them with Azurite, they can't be CC'd anymore, but they take more damage. So now he's infusing one of these mobs. He's infusing one that's CC'd already. So now it broke the totem because he's immune. He takes 150% more damage, but he's immune to crowd control. So what you do is then you fixate this mob and you kill him. You can also already kill this guy. So basically what you do is you wait for him to empower a specific ad. Now there was a bug with this fight that you can force him not to spawn ads anymore. And then when he casts his Resonant Pulse, any active ads will also cast Resonant Pulse. As a tank, what you would do is you would face this smash into a wall. Ideally, you would just like face him into this wall or something like that. So you're playing the good old wall POV. And then what he'll do is he'll spawn more ads every once in a while, periodically. So ideally, you try to fixate them under boss. I'm going to just knock them in. I am on heroic difficulty, so he's only spawning 1. On mythic, he spawns 2 ads. It's fixating on me. You're trying to cleave as much as you can. Again, you can see it with like things like leg sweep. Tectonic smash is a frontal. If you face into the wall, your group doesn't have to worry about the mechanic at all. Makes it very easy. Again, he's going to do a Resonant Pulse. It now will also happen on the Earth Rager, will also cast Resonant Quake. So this is a time where this is scary. You don't want to stand in this. He's empowered so he can't be killed, so you want to make sure you're killing him. And that's the fight. He's basically frontal, aim at the wall. He spawns ads. You want to CC them and keep them under boss to cleave them down. And when they get empowered, you want to kill them even quicker. And then whenever he does the Resonant Pulse, CC whichever thing you can. And then you're going to just kill him. Easy peasy. This boss is really boring. I'm not looking forward to this fight. If they were going to rework a boss in here, I'm hoping they rework this guy. So at this point, 2 bosses dead, 55% trash count. Let's move down the hill. So you take this minecart, there's a little bit of RP. There's a way to run on your mount down here. It's lethal. You can die from doing it. And it's technically like 2% faster. So I wouldn't recommend doing it. So how I would normally pull this area back in the day when there wasn't a skip is you pull this pack of assistants with this mastermind, as long as he's not near any other pack. You would taunt him over. Masterminds are very scary. Respect these energy lashes. Respect their other casts. I don't remember what they are. So you have assistants. The energy lash is a big channel on the tank. He's not landing it, so it's not doing anything. Blowtorch needs to be interrupted. It's a frontal that locks on, that channels onto the tank. So you want to face it like away from people. Energy lash does big damage on the tank, and the alchemist applies a poison. So this is very scary tank pulls. But eventually you'll kill this pack. It's gonna be fine. Be careful not to pull this back here. And we're gonna skip a lot of this area. These alchemists and assistants, and specifically the masterminds, are very lethal. So what I recommend doing is you kind of skip right through here. You pull these subjects and you tag in this mastermind here. And this gives you a little bit of room to work with. These subjects don't do much. They're non-elites. They obviously do a lot of physical damage and stuff, and then they'll eventually mutate. But you'll typically blow these up very quickly. Masterminds are obviously scary as well. Now, the next 2 pulls are lethal. Generally, what you would do here is you would do some type of invis tech. So you would come in here. I guess I only have 1 invis. You would invis through this area. Now, these masterminds have stealth detect. You want to skip this pack because these alchemists are freaking horrible. You would get here, but these mobs will have to be pulled. But now you have the boss room to work with. This pull has 2 masterminds. Compare this pull, for anyone who's currently playing, compare this to Grim Batol. And imagine if you're pulling 2 lava benders with more trash. They're very scary. They're very scary for your tank. They're very scary for your group. So that's how you would do that. You would skip through, and then you could backpull if you want to, but I don't recommend backpulling any of this trash. You're going to be getting your trash probably from the start of the dungeon. So let's talk about our percent, because now we're at Rixa Flux Flame, the 3rd boss. So what we did is we have a new pull in here. We did this with the padding mastermind. We did rats with this mastermind here. And then we did this pack. So we're right now at 71%. So we're missing 30% count. And we did 1 invis skip. So if you didn't do an invis skip and you pulled this as well, you're at 76. But we did the invis skip because we're ethical gamers. We know what's deadly and what's not deadly. We'll talk about percent in a bit. Let's talk about Rixa Flux Flame. This is by far my favorite boss in here. I think this boss is very enjoyable. I think it's very cool. It's an interesting take on like having kind of this like negative space to work with. She spawns pools on the ground. There's other things that spawn pools on the ground, and it's your job to keep the room clean using her mechanics, which is kind of fun. One thing that I'm going to say, though, is that she does a ton of magic damage. What's going to happen is these pipes around the room are going to spew out azurite in a straight line across. So if it's from this pipe here, it's going to come straight across like this. If this pipe shoots out, it's going to go right across like that. If this pipe shoots out, it's going to go across like this. And if this pipe shoots, it's going to go like this. All quadrants are going to be hit. If you think of this as if it was almost like a square, you have 4 quadrants to work with. What you do is you start by pulling her to kind of one of the corners. You're going to bait this first azurite catalyst at the edge of the room. And then you're going to kind of rotate around the room. Now, what you're doing is you're looking out for whichever pipe glows yellow. We have another catalyst coming out as well. Here it is. So it's going to come straight across like this. We're going to bait the next catalyst. This shit comes out. And then she's going to do this thing called Propellant Blast. And what this does is it baits on a random player. And you want to be between her and these pools because it's going to blow the pools away from your group, from the boss. As you can see here, it's blowing it away. And it's going to happen twice. So what you do is you sidestep one. And then you want to line yourself up with another section of the room. So now the room is clean again. This is very good. This means you can have a lot of room to work with. Now the pipes have a chance, if I'm not mistaken, they used to go clockwise or counterclockwise. It would randomize. So once you know the second position, you know every single time how it would rotate. It started here, so now it's going to be here. So it's going to be going counterclockwise every single time. It's going to go straight across like this. We're going to bait, and then we're going to move far. We want to be careful. This stuff is very, very dangerous. And now we're going to bait it like this again. So we're going to bait one here to blow this stuff away. And then we're going to sidestep to our right. So now we're going to sidestep here. Got to be a little careful. It's a little bit wider than it looks. And now this should blow the rest of it. We're going to sidestep again. Now the one last thing I need to talk about is this chemical burn. Think of last boss of Siege. It's going to apply it to 2 players. You need to dispel one, big healing on the other. What's very cool about this is you can spell reflect it and you can diffuse magic it. So Brewmaster Monks, you're going to have a good time on this fight. You're going to do a lot of damage. But you definitely are going to need to be... Healers are going to be sweating on this fight. Now, I think they need to reduce this slightly. I think the magic damage on this fight is kind of outrageous from this chemical burn. It happens very frequently where eventually it'll target players who just don't have DRs. And this favors people with high magic DR, spell reflect, diffuse magic, etc. Also classes with like MD revival, like those classes are going to be really good. If you're playing Warlock, you're going to probably want an imp on this fight if you can. If you're playing like Demonology, or not Demonology, if you're playing the other, like if you're playing Affliction or Destro, you might want an imp for this fight to help with the spells. But this fight does a ton of damage. You're going to be sweating the entire time. There's a lot of movement. There's a lot of like weird little niche baiting things that are going to happen. But as you can see, I didn't do the last propellant blast correctly, and this room is filling up very quickly. I don't have a lot of room to work with here. So on our next propellant blast, I want to try to clear some part of the room. Ideally, we want to push it towards whichever pipe is going to be next. But that's the fight. I like this fight a lot because you have the choice to push the stuff around. Pugs, you're going to hate this fight. I have no doubt about it. Anyways, fight goes down, we're vibing. We're big vibing. So we killed Rix of Flux Flame. We are 3 bosses. We have 30% trash count remaining. There's a lot you can do on this hill. I don't recommend pulling a lot of trash on this hill, but let's see what we can pull without doing any skips, and then figure out what we can pull earlier in the dungeon that will warrant easier percent count gained. So there's a couple of more mobs in here. These are all new mobs. Basically, each section of the dungeon has different mobs, which is kind of cool. Technician and War Machine. Technicians just heal and empower the War Machine. So technicians by themselves are not scary at all. You basically can ignore these mobs. So later up the hill when you see them, as long as you don't have a War Machine in your pull, you're going to be fine. When they are in the pull, they do 2 mechanics. They cast a heal on the War Machine, and they also cast a thing called Overload. Overload will empower the War Machine, giving it 60% haste, which makes it extremely lethal on this charge shot. This overcharge here you want to stop. Again, as you saw, I just casted Paralysis. Well, I killed it as well. Generally, what would happen is if you stopped it with a stun or a CC, it wouldn't cast again, which is how mobs should work in dungeons, in my opinion. They no longer work like that in a lot of dungeons. I imagine Blizzard will go back and fix that. War Machines also have an interesting thing where they spawn bombs. Bombs give percent. So it's similar to like old school Braconite Hollow. So they spawn mines similar to this. The mobs will fixate, but if you kill them, which they don't have a lot of health, they give like 0.2%. So what people used to do is you used to farm War Machines. You would pull a War Machine, they would keep spawning bombs, you'd kill all the bombs, and then you would finally kill a War Machine. Pretty easy. Next, you have the Specialists. Specialists don't do much. All they do is they spawn artillery. This artillery barrage, it requires you to just move. You have to move pretty quick. You have to be ready to move for it, so definitely pay attention to it. It looks like it can be interrupted, so you can always interrupt it. Not a big deal. But yeah, these guys are pretty chill. These guys aren't too painful to deal with. It's just a lot of movement. Melee are going to have an easier time in here than other people. Sky Scorchers are a very interesting take, though, on Tank Buster mobs, because the Tank Buster is a channel on a party member where the tank has to soak, which I think is kind of cool. So these Buster shots are just going to get spammed out, do a little bit of group damage, do a little bit of tank damage. It's then going to do the sighted... No, what is it called? So Concussion Grenade, you're going to just have to dodge that. And then it does this thing called Azurite Heartseeker or something like that. Let's see if it ever casts it. So it's going to go on me eventually. Do I have to get him lower on health? Here we go. The tank has to stand in between the line and the player. So if I was just a Windwalker monk, the tank would have to soak. So it's kind of cool. It does 3 shots. It does, I think it does, I want to say it does physical damage, and that's why the tank needs to soak it. And you just like use a mitigation for it. So you just stand in between the lines. So you want to, the DPS player needs to move away from it to give the tank enough room to like soak. All right, so the rest of the hill is just that. It's Technicians, Sky Scorchers, Specialists, and War Machines. That's it. There's different combinations of them. You can kind of pull them together in unique ways. You could even do like a sky. Here's a Sky Scorcher. You can pull the specialist in. You could pull this technician, specialist, technician, and Sky Scorcher. Because there's no war machine, these technicians don't do anything. Obviously, there's a lot to dodge here. This is why you generally skipped this hill. There's just a lot going on, right? You have to run away from mines. You have to run away, or you have to spread out for hard seekers. You have to dodge concussion grenades. You have to dodge the artillery. Again, things like leg sweep, knockups, etc., can be used to create windows to do a lot of damage. But this pull is very, very annoying. But if we're holding W up this hill, maybe let's go right side a little bit, and then I'll look at our percent count. So we'll pull the side war machine here. We'll do the war machine by himself. We'll kill him. This mine spawned. Again, these mines give percent as well. So you could just kind of stand near them and kill them when they spawn. We'll do this 2-pack here with the specialist and the Sky Scorcher. And then you have this final pack at the very top. I believe you could Warlock Gate actually skip. If you were playing with a Warlock, you could put a Warlock Gate through here. That'll allow you to skip through. You can also Mind Soothe this pack. The only thing you won't Mind Soothe is the machine, obviously, because it's a mechanical. But you will have to pull this pack, which is pretty scary, because it's double Sky Scorcher, Technician, and War Machine. What groups used to do back in the days used to death run this. You used to just have someone soul stoned, or like have a battle res, or someone who can meld, like an Resto Druid, for example. They would run into the boss room. Everyone else would just die right here, and then you'd get a mass res. So we're at Motherlode Razdunk. Let's look at our percent doing that hill. So I'm gonna just do a new pull. I'm gonna count it all as one pull, even though you wouldn't do it in one pull. We pulled the Sky Scorcher, Specialist, Sky Scorcher, Technician. We did the one War Machine. We stepped on a lot of these mines, so I'm gonna just count the mines in here. We did this pack here. We also did this. There was a patrolling War Machine. I think it was this guy here. No, it was this guy here. I'm dumb. And then it was these 2 mines here. I didn't pull this though. And then it's this pack. 98%. We're looking good. These war machines also spawn bombs that'll give you percent. You can also back pull like a technician at the end of the boss fight, which will give you the 101. So, realistically, you don't have to pull crazy amount of trash at the beginning of the dungeon to actually do this fight. You can mostly hold W. The worst part about this dungeon is that a lot of these percentages, each mob gives like 0.8, 0.6, whatever it might be. So it feels bad pulling a lot of these mobs most of the time. Now, of course, you can do more skips in this area. You can definitely do more. You definitely don't want to pull out of trash like I did here. You're not going to pull that giant center pack like I did. Generally, you're going to want to skip it. But having a 98% route, getting to the last boss and being able to back pull a couple, or just stepping on a couple more crawler mines while you're running up the hill, or farming war machines, definitely an option. So I think people are overthinking how much percent you can do. What I imagine Blizzard's going to do is they're going to come in here and they're going to change the percent, actually making it worse than it currently is. So you have to pull more mobs, which probably isn't going to feel super great. But let's quickly talk about Motherlode Razdunk, the final boss, because there's some things to talk about here for sure. So Motherlode Razdunk, this guy had some issues. So the general strategy would be you can pull him out of the room, which is not good boss encounter design. So what you would do is generally tanks would position here. There's a couple of places that range could stand as well to avoid mechanics. You could stand at the bottom of the stairs, or you would stand right here on the grate and you could just ignore the swirls completely. The only thing you have to watch out for is the thing like the Gatling gun, as well as the Bomba heads that are flying around the room. But basically, upon pulling this mob, or boss, he summons these Bombas, or Boombas, I should say. You can see the one is right above me here, and there's the one that's going far. And basically, they're going to make these kind of cross patterns across the room. There are 6 basically little sectors that you can stand in, basically where each of the grates are, as well as in the center. And what it does is every once in a while they'll just fire, and then after they fire, they eventually move into a new position, so it constantly changes how the room layout is. There's also this honing missile. It typically only targets a ranged player. You need to have a range in your group. If you have a melee, one of your melee are just gonna have to run out really quick whenever it happens, which is really obnoxious. So never bring a full melee group to this key. And then this Gatling gun is something you have to watch out for. He'll typically target the tank, or he'll target a random player, but basically you just have to run counterclockwise or clockwise depending on whichever way he faces. So why tanks would pull him to the outside of the room is because then you never have to move him, you never have to dodge swirls, and range can just plant on their grates to never have to worry about it. But Gatling gun comes out, and then you're gonna run around. And the reason why you like to stand at the outside of the room is whenever the swirls happen, you have a safe spot to always stand. Now range, this was a safe spot right here. You would never have to move. Let's see if I get targeted by the Boomba. here in a second. So the Boombas are coming. If you stand in this position here, the way that the swirls are coded is that they never hit the spot for some reason, no matter which area that they actually stand in. So the only thing the range have to do is they have to just worry about the Gatling gun. So as you can see, I'm not getting hit by a swirl. And then if it happens again, I shouldn't get hit by it either. If it doesn't move into the right spot, I'll talk about the rest of the fight. But basically, if the melee are all positioned here and the range is standing right here or outside of the room, the honing missile will never hit anyone. You only have to worry about dodging one mechanic, which is just kind of dumb. Kind of dumb to never have to do mechanics. But as you can see, here's this thing. The bomb is about to fire. The swirl should never actually hit me if I'm standing. It's like right on this big opening on the grate here. Anyways, when you get the boss to 50%, he will phase, or 45. He phases. He spawns 2 Sky Scorchers. We know what these mobs do. We saw them before. And he's going to spawn 3 of these giant bombs. As you can see, they're here, here, and here, based on these giant swirls. And basically what your group wants to do is you want to kill these Sky Scorchers, and you want to move to these bombs, because we have to remove his shield, and we can only do that by hitting 3 of these. Now, if you miss, it's only going to delay this intermission phase. You can only leave intermission once you kill all 3 bombs. While you're doing this, you're killing the Sky Scorcher. He's going to target the player with the arrow. As long as the bomb is inside of that circle, you should be good. So even if you're like kind of off of it a little bit, this should still hit, I believe. So this should still break. And then you want to basically be pre-positioned to get here. And then obviously we just have to deal with the Sky Scorchers. And they just do the Azerite Heartseeker that the tank needs to soak. So the tanks are busy during this phase. Like, don't expect the tank to be doing anything but doing his thing. Everyone else needs to focus on getting the bombs broken or getting them out of this phase. I failed keys back in the day because we missed a bomb. You know, because it adds 10 or whatever seconds, 15 seconds to the intermission whenever you miss, because he basically like has to reload, and it has an internal cooldown. And then eventually the boss will die, and then the little boss spawns, but you need to be careful. I've seen, and mostly because I've had this happen to me, is that if you're tanking him on the outside of the room, like right here, and you're in the wrong spot, this boss can reset if he leaves the room, despite him being little guy. If the tank's in a bad position, and he steps a little bit too close to the edge, the boss will reset. And if that happens, it's just GG. Anyways, we'll knock him out, and that's Motherlode. That's the dungeon. I don't think percentage is as crazy as people make it out to be. I think, like, yeah, you can definitely not pull as much as I did in this area, and you can allocate that percent somewhere else. You might not want to pull mini boss. You might incorporate some more skips, but generally speaking, you can pretty much hold W in this place, and you'll get your counts. I definitely acknowledge that there's certain things that need to be changed. I think second boss bugs need to be fixed. I think third boss needs to have some of the damage tuned down. I think Moggle Razdunk isn't fun when you're ignoring the majority of his mechanics. And then I do think that some trash is way more punishing, specifically in this alchemist area. So I think Blizzard really will need to look, especially after testing and stuff on PTR, will need to take a good look at these mechanics and tune them properly, because you don't, as a dungeon designer, you don't want people ignoring your trash. Like, people should want to pull certain packs because, well, obviously they're easier, but because they're maybe engaging or fun, or you can pull bigger in a certain area. This is an area that you generally would always try to avoid no matter what. So yeah, definitely areas for improvement here. But overall, it's going to be a pretty fun dungeon. As you can see, pretty large pulls. Obviously things like Grease Gun need to be fixed. I think they need to actually have some different conditions for it to be met, whether it's like a cast, whether it just applies a dot instead of direct damage. But the Grease Gun mechanic is really brutal if you pull too many jockeys without having them get into mechs. I don't know why the jockeys weren't getting into mechs earlier. That's kind of a weird thing for me. Normally they would just jump in right away, but maybe they already changed it. Maybe it's because of the difficulty I'm on, or maybe it's because of my level is so much higher than what the mobs actually are in these dungeons. But anyways, I think Motherlode has some tweaks. I think it could end up being a good dungeon, and I believe it was Growl who said it on the Bench podcast, but basically he was saying Blizzard has the choice to make the dungeon good or bad. It all kind of lives or dies based on their tuning. So they have the option to make it good. They could also do something like the Mists of Chernascythe Maze and make it worse. We'll see though. Anyways, let me know what you guys think about this dungeon down below, and I will be doing boss guides and trash guides eventually. once PTR testing is available and stuff like that. So anyways, let me know what you guys think. I will, big shout out to all my Patreon supporters. Without you guys, I couldn't make content like this. I hope you're all staying happy, healthy, and I'll catch you all in the next one. Peace.